Summer has begun, and in this episode, I talk to you about how to become a Nibmeister. I show you all of the Edison Nouveau Premieres, and I give you some tips on how to write with fountain pens on cheap paper. Hey, what's up there? It's Brian Goulet of gouletpens.com. I'll go ahead and take the sunglasses off. It's the start of summer here, and it was Hawaiian shirt day here at the GPC office, which is why I'm wearing this beautiful shirt that you see here, which I actually bought. We got this at Goodwill for the traveling with fountain pens video, so you may notice this shirt from that, and I just left it here at work for the last couple of years, and so this is the only Hawaiian shirt I own. But anyway. Technically, I guess the company owns it. I don't really own it, but whatever. It's been a pretty crazy busy week for me the last week. If you watched Q&A last week and got our newsletter, you know that I had some personal anniversaries that came up that were difficult, and it just ended up being really crazy. We had a couple of vendors visiting from outside, and just had a lot of just random things that were happening. It was very, very crazy for me. So I enjoyed a really nice low-key Father's Day weekend. It was really nice. I didn't do anything crazy. Hung out with my parents a little bit. Went on a nice couple-mile walk with my dad and just kind of reflected with him a little bit. So that was nice. Always good to get some family time in there. Summer has definitely begun. Here in the northern hemisphere anyway. It's getting pretty hot around here. We're getting thunderstorms like crazy. It's definitely there. I had something interesting happen this week. A couple of years ago, actually, Amazon opened up tours of their distribution centers, and we have a distribution center here on the south end of Richmond. And so I had signed up a while ago, and finally got called up to do it. So me and a couple of my folks here got to go and check out their distribution center. It was absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, we've got a pretty tightened up operation here, but just to see, I mean, they're literally logistically, they're like the pinnacle, right? But to see, they have a 1.2 million square foot facility, 28 football fields. So it literally was like you would look down their aisles where their inventory is stored, and it reached a vanishing point. You couldn't even see the end of it. It was completely unreal. So, it was just crazy. So getting to see kind of how they do things was really, really fascinating. But at the same time, it was also yeah, I don't really want that. I really like, having my hands in things and being much smaller than that. And, so it really gave me a distinct appreciation for our team and what we do here, the way we do about it, the videos, all that kind of stuff, while at the same time giving an appreciation for what they're doing there. So that was cool. Thank you, Amazon, for opening that up and allowing, the public to see what you do. That was kind of cool. Let's see here. Let's talk about some pen stuff, shall we? One thing this week that we had come out was the Stipula Prisma Rainbow. No, sorry. I got to get this name right. Stipula Etruria Rainbow Prisma 88. Titanium. It's got a titanium nib. Anyway, so it's a very fascinating pen. I don't know if you can see it too much here. It was really cool because a couple of weeks ago we had Luca, the guy who, if you look at my Instagram feed, my personal one, you see I have a picture with Luca. He's, the founder of Stipula there. And he, I don't know if he's the founder, sorry. I don't want to misspeak there. But anyway, he was explaining to me how they actually do up this material. So it's essentially layers of acrylic. And when they pour the resin, they have different colors, and they cut it into sheets, and they cut it very thin, thinner than you would normally. So when you normally pour a whole slab of resin, it's, an inch thick or so that you can turn an entire pen out of it. Well, they do that, but then they cut it into very, very thin pieces, and then they use basically an adhesive that chemically bonds the two together. So it kind of blends the color a little bit in between, and they layer it with all the different colors. So literally, if you look at the pen at certain angles, you can see there's a red layer, a yellow, green, blue, purple, and it kind of goes down like that. And so then when they turn it, long-wise like that, it ends up with these colors that end up kind of blending. It's very, very cool. I think it's a very neat material. They had done a pen like this of a higher number that had a rainbow cap and a finial and a clear barrel and a rainbow grip, I believe. But this is the first time they've done the full rainbow pen. They only did 88 pieces, and we're fortunate enough to get a few of them. So as of when this video posts, we probably still have a few left, but we have had most of them go. So if you're interested in this particular pen, it's $476. It's not a cheap pen, but it's pretty cool. And the titanium nib, if you're familiar with the Keras Customs titanium nib, it's a similar kind of nib. It's made by Bach, and it has an element of flexibility to it as well. So that is a pen that is definitely worth checking out. It's fairly good size too. It's interesting because we haven't done a lot with Stipula and the Etruria, or really much of any of their pens. And so when people have said, oh, I thought the Etruria was a small pen, it's like, no, this thing's not. It's about the size of a Edison Collier, pretty much. So it's a good size pen. I like it. And that one's mine. Let's see here. What else have we got going on? The Aurora 88 Flex in brown came in a little bit early. I know we pretty much just launched the yellow, but we have the brown as well. So if you're into that, if that is your color, you can check that one out. We have a handful of those. So once we sell out of those, that'll be it. But you can check it out if you're interested. And then we have now today, actually, are just launching the Edison Nouveau Premier in the 2017 summer color, which I'm going to wait because I have a Q&A question about it. So I'm actually going to wait to show it to you until later in the broadcast here. So you get to skip ahead if you're really curious, but the color is called Delphinium, and I'll get more into that in that question in a minute. And then we have a couple of deals that are going on right now. If you're a newsletter subscriber of ours, you're probably already well aware of it, but we have something called Ink Sample Palooza, which we've done a couple of times in the past. We haven't done one in about 2 years, but basically we do a 20% off sale of all of our ink samples, and we've got that running through July 18th. So if you happen to be into testing out some inks. It works out well for us because, summer, there's usually a bit of a lull as everybody's kids are getting out of school and just a lot going on, vacations and all that kind of stuff. We tend to be a little bit slower, so it's something for us to keep our team busy because I'd rather do something to keep our team busy than, send people home. So that's just kind of a thing that we do internally, and also for you guys, it's something kind of exciting. Of course, you get a deal on some samples, and as you got summer going on, it gives you something interesting and exciting to do, playing around with a bunch of different inks. So it works out well for us. And then another deal that we have going on is a Pilot Vanishing Point or Decimo, combining it with ink. So if you buy a Vanishing Point or Decimo, you get a free bottle of Iroshizuku of your choosing. So you can check out our options on the site there, and that's going for a little bit here. I don't remember if we have an end date on that one, but you can check out our website for more details on that. Not a bad deal. $28 bottle value with that on the pen. So if you happen to be interested in one of those pens, check it out. So you can get the hookup right now at Goulet Pens. All right, enough with the shameless plugs. Let's get into some questions for this week, shall we? And I'm kicking it off strong this week with some pen and writing questions. This is from Joe.robs on Instagram. I'm 15 and I'm extremely interested in fountain pens. I've decided that I would like to take a step further into fountain pendom and become a nibsmith or nibmeister, someone who grinds nibs or does nib work on pens. I'm not know the proper term for them. I was wondering, how can I take this step and how would I learn? Thanks, Joe. All right, Joe. I think nibmeister is a pretty common term. Nibsmith is, a way. The nibsmith is Dan Smith. I think he has a play on words with his name there. But, nibmeister, I think, is the more common terminology. But, there's no official school for this kind of thing, so you could pretty much call yourself whatever you want. It's whatever the general public refers to you as. That was terrible grammar, but whatever you are commonly known, that is what your name could be. So anyway, I think the Nibmeister is fairly appropriate. There's no a kind of official training or schooling or even books that I'm aware that are out there for doing this kind of thing. So I think it's cool that you're interested in this. I do think that there is an underserved market for nib tuning and pen repair and stuff like that. I think it's something that I would consider to be a true craft, like a trade craft today. So it's in the traditional days before you had higher education and things like that, you would have a trade and you would become an apprentice to more of a master or a journeyman, or and so you would have a master tradesman who would do their thing. Say you were a carpenter, right? Like you would be a carpenter, master carpenter, and you would have somebody who would come on, be an apprentice, and then as they chose that that was their trade, they'd be a journeyman, and they would learn how to do it until they became a master of their own, and then they took on their own apprentices, right? Like that was a very common thing for thousands of years. Not as popular today, especially in the US, but I consider the whole Nibmeister thing really more of a kind of a traditional trade because it's very skilled labor. It's very much of a craftsmanship is heavily involved in that. And the individual that's doing it really puts their stamp on their own methods and things like that. So it's got a lot of that. And there's not really a lot of formal training involved. So the people that I know that are doing it now pretty much either learned it from somebody else or taught themselves how to do it and just kind of figured it out. So those are pretty much your two methods for learning how to do it, to be quite honest with you. I don't know a lot of people that are really getting into it. I've heard of some people that have gotten into it a little bit and done it for a while and then kind of gotten out of it. Younger folks especially, man, I just think there's such an opportunity to get into it. If you are somewhat entrepreneurial minded, I think the logistics of managing the business side of it is probably what trips most people up, because I know from doing the e-commerce thing here, the logistics that are involved with doing that can be kind of overwhelming. And if you get into it because you really love nibs and pens and tuning stuff, you can do well at going to shows and stuff like that because you can get a lot of interaction with minimal kind of overhead and minimal logistics involved. But if you're talking about like being in your house and then shipping pens back and forth and everywhere, there's a lot of time involved with that correspondence and tracking and shipping and all that kind of stuff that can really bog you down. And if you have not figured out a good process for that, that can be kind of difficult to overcome. Plus kind of getting your name out there, it takes a little while to get it going. So if you have to really kind of overcome that. So I think in terms, and that's like once you have the skill, right? So I think that, there's some videos out there that some people have done. I've done some very basic tuning videos, nothing that I would, say you should start charging money for after you just watch my videos, but it can at least help you understand what's going on. There's other people out there that have done it. Stephen Brown's got some great videos. I know Matt Armstrong for Pen Habit has done some. And there's some other folks on YouTube. Just look up, nib tuning, nib grinding, anything like that on YouTube, and just, you're basically gonna have to scrap together whatever knowledge you can get and experiment and try it and figure it out. And you're gonna ruin a lot of nibs in the process, but you're gonna be learning as you go. You got to get your hands on as many junk nibs as you possibly can. So if you're really interested and really passionate about this, I think you can figure out ways to get cheap nibs, whether it's going onto the Fountain Pen Network and saying, hey, does anybody have any throwaway pens that are terrible or don't write well or whatever that you want to send me so I can practice? I want to be a Nibmeister. I want to do this kind of thing. And I think, with you're young enough, and if you can kind of have it as, hey, I want to do this thing. I want to be somebody in the pen industry, and I want this to be my career. I bet you're going to get some people that have been around for a while that is like, hey, that's really cool. I'd love to help you out. Let me send you some junk pens that I have, and you can play around with them. If you just go around asking for handouts, that could turn some people off. But if you say, hey, this is my noble cause, I really want to practice and learn how to do this thing, and you're kind of legit about it, I think you might be able to get a hand up from some individuals who find that to be kind of cool. As far as tools and what you're going to need, it's not a real heavy investment in terms of that stuff. You'll need a loop of some kind, 10x, 15x magnification. You're just going to have to kind of play around and see what fits you. Micro mesh, mylar paper maybe, depending on what you're getting into. A grip, something to grip it, remove stuff. There's a good site called Pen Tooling that is for like pen repair and stuff like that. Dale is pretty cool and has done some good stuff. He's got some kind of more specialized tools. If you find you're really getting into it, he has some more specialized tools that are more of an investment, but that you could get into if you really get into that. And then I would encourage you, if you get the opportunity, there's nothing like observing somebody that knows what they're doing, because you can pick up on stuff so well. If you get a chance to go to any pen show where there are Nibmeisters present, you can usually research who is going to be there. It may not be a full listing, but any of the major shows that you go to, LA, DC, and a bunch of other Chicago, maybe Chicago, Denver, other things like that, you're going to be able to see Nibmeisters in action there. And if you tell them that you're trying to learn, they'll usually be pretty cool about you just kind of sitting and observing as they work. So if you want to devote a day or a couple of days to going to a show, if you have any near you, and then you want to literally just go and plop down and watch them all day. And then usually, you know, they're working and stuff like that, and if you're not too obnoxious to them and disrupting their work, you may be able to ask them a question here and there. So that could be kind of cool. But I would recommend observing them if you can. I've done that at a couple of shows myself. I've been able to plop down next to Richard Binder or Mike Masayama and just kind of watch them work for a couple of hours. And you learn some really interesting things, especially as they're turning over pens and doing different grinds and doing different things. You get to see their setups, and you can ask them like, oh, that's an interesting tool. Where'd you get that? Oh, I homemade it. Oh, okay. You know, and then so beyond just the basic like tuning tools, you'll need some grinding equipment, because when you get into some of the stuff, if you want to grind, you know, down to nib size or make obliques or anything like that, you know, a micro mesh is just not going to cut it. You're going to need something more aggressive. And what I see kind of like two different schools of thought in terms of the grinding. Usually it's like some kind of Dremel or some kind of rotary tool that has like a diamond wheel on it. That's not a huge investment, but you know, you need something to hold it in place, and then you have the wheel and you use the diamond grits to do the grind, and then you kind of polish with this stuff. And then the other way that I see is more of like I know Mike Masayama's got a pretty cool homemade machine that he has that is a grinding wheel that actually turns toward him. So it's a very different approach. So if you have the Dremel type apparatus, it's spinning and you're kind of, you know, grinding on the side of the grinding wheel. And if you're doing it with a grinding wheel that's moving towards you, it's just a different approach. So, you know, just like any other trade or craft, or if you play an instrument or you do any kind of sports or anything like that, the equipment that you train on and practice on, that will kind of like be the way that you end up going. So, you know, I think the Dremel route is the way that most people end up going, just because the tools are a little more accessible. You don't have to home make your own kind of jig. But that is something that I've observed in doing both here. And then I think, you know, because you're so young, you know, you've got to really want to do this, because it's not going to be just handed to you on a silver platter. It's something that is going to be a very different path than most people would probably ever even understand. If you tell your teacher that you want to do this at school, they're going to be like, what are you even talking about? You know, it's so far outside the norm. But I think personally, I think there's tremendous opportunity for you to do something like this, or really anybody else. I don't know your raw skill, your talent, anything like that. You have to have some skills. Like, you have to have the goods. You can't just want it and study it. You know, it's kind of like, this is going to be the weirdest analogy ever, but it's like the movie Monsters, Inc. Actually, the movie Monsters University is even more fitting, if you've ever seen that. I have young kids. My analogies are going to be kid movies, but the movie Monsters University, it's a very cute movie. I love it. It's like the origin story for Monsters, Inc. Well, Mike Wazowski wants to be a scarer. He studies it. He wants it so bad ever since he's a kid, and he grows up and he gets to college and he realizes that he just doesn't have that raw talent that's needed. But he becomes a teacher and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, that's the whole story. So you got to have the goods to be able to do it, because it is a skill. And if you just don't have the technical acumen and the handwork to be able to do it, you're gonna have a tough road ahead. So you gotta have that as a baseline, and then you gotta learn how to do all this stuff. So at 15, you're really young, and you have time. You do have time to figure this out. Personally, I think if you're 15, by the time you're 18, if you practice this a lot, I think you can pay your way through college, which I would recommend you do. Maybe go to some kind of like business or finance type schools, just so you can learn what's going on, or maybe you just try to teach yourself on the side. I don't know. You know, there's debate about, you know, how relevant higher education is depending on what it is you're trying to do. I think if you don't know what you're going to do, you know, go and get just a general like business education, just because you'll be able to apply a lot of that to whatever it is you end up doing. But that's the route that I ended up going. So anyway, if you are able to kind of devote yourself over the next 3 years in your spare time, and I mean like really devote yourself, not passively try it an hour or two a week and just kind of cruise Fountain Pen Network. I mean, if you really get hardcore into it, you find pens, you tune it, you try different grinding, you test out equipment, you really make it your passion. You may have to get a part-time job so that you can pay for the equipment that it is that you're going to be buying. You do that for 3 years and you really learn the lingo, you really learn the stuff. You go to some pen shows, you network with some Nibmeisters who are able to teach you little bits here and there, and you can pick up on it and hone and craft and all that. You get some emails and start emailing people, you know, who are willing to give you the time. I think you can do that if you hustle and you kind of make it happen. I think that opportunity is there, but you're going to have to hustle. Like, no one is going to just hand it to you, just especially because you're 15. I know you think like, oh gosh, well, my teachers love to help me, and maybe they would love to help. Nobody's really going to like hold your hand through this process. You're going to have to like make it happen on your own if you really want to do it. And that goes for anybody, not even just you're 15, but anybody else that is interested in like Nibmeistering or anything like that. You're really going to have to make it happen, you know, because even me being Brian Goulet, I have had a hard time getting a hold of any of these Nibmeisters and sitting down with them. And I've been able to at bits here and there, but even with the kind of the pull and the clout that I have, they're very busy people. And they don't necessarily like just want to sit down and train everybody all the time because, you know, there's a bit of proprietary skill and stuff that they've developed over time, and they don't just like hand that out to everybody. So it's going to be a bit of a tough go. So I just kind of want to set you up for that. But if you are willing to kind of do that, I think the opportunities are pretty cool. So try to find any book, any website, any forum that'll teach you anything, any YouTube video, whatever it is. Hustle and network with as many people that you can in the pen business. And I think even if you have moderate talent, I think you'll at least be able to pay a good way of your portion through school doing this if you're doing it well. And I think you can make it happen, but don't be naive about what it's going to take. So I say go get it, but it's not going to be for everybody. So hopefully that I get to talk to you in a couple of years, and maybe I'll meet you at a future pen show and you can tell me that you're doing it, and that would be really, really cool. So we'll see if that happens, shall we? All right, Athena asked the next question in an email. With summer coming up and a new Edison Nouveau Premier due, I was wondering if you could do a round down of all the Edison Nouveau Premieres, regular and special editions in the past. I could not picture myself spending $150 on a pen. Now that I have, could to appreciate their value, I have missed out on many, Fireball, Cobalt, and the Arctic Currents. Then I found out there was a matte black that was sold as a regular edition. How I wish I had come to the fountain pen scene earlier. Okay, so I am now going to show you all of the premieres that we've ever made. This is not counting samples and other things that we've experimented with that have never been for sale. Everything I have here has been publicly for sale at some point, including the latest and greatest one, which I'm going to save for the very end. So I have them all here in order, and I will go through each of them one at a time and kind of tell you the a little bit of the story behind it. So let's see if I can do this in any kind of a reasonable manner. Maybe I can move my computer a little bit so you can see what's going on. There we go. Okay, let me zoom in a bit so you can see. Of course, it's going to zoom in above me. All right. So starting off over here on the right. That's, whoops. I think it's not focusing quite on there. It's focusing behind me. Is my autofocus not on? Yeah, autofocus is not quite on. Okay, I'll have to zoom out a little bit. So starting out, I have Cappuccino, Cobalt, Satin Black. These were the original 3 colors that we had. The Satin Black is the one that's the matte black that you were talking about. And the story behind these 3, we wanted to come out with 3 colors initially. And this was me, Rachel, and Brian Gray. Each picked a color. So Rachel picked the Cappuccino, I picked the Cobalt, and Brian Gray picked the Satin Black. The Satin Black is actually, it was made to look like an ebonite, and it really kind of does. It's got that kind of satin finish, and the way that you achieve that finish, it's a resin just like these highly polished ones, except he knocks it down with a higher grit of, I don't know exactly what it is, but a higher grit of abrasive to give it kind of that matte finish. It's an extra step to do that, but we made it the same price, even though it was more labor to do it that way, just because, you know, I think Brian just really liked the look of that, and we agreed and we thought it was cool. So we had kind of an unofficial contest when we first came out with the pen to see which color was going to do best. Of course, Rachel initially, you know, picked the Cappuccino, and it is still available for sale today, even 7 years later. So Rachel wins because the other 2 we've discontinued. Brian's went out first, mine went out next, and this one is still going strong. So Rachel, throughout the history of the Edison Goulet relationship, has proven herself to be a fantastic color picker. So that was the original ones there. Next we had the, I don't even know what name we came up with. I think we just called it Blue Ebonite. But it's a black and blue ebonite. I'm failing to remember the name of this one. I don't think we came up with a fancy name for this one. Or did we? Dang it. I was studying up all the names to make sure that I had them all memorized. Okay, well, I'm going to be proven wrong here afterwards. But this was like shortly after we launched the pens, like maybe the first 3 months. We did a limited edition. It was only 50 pens, but it's a black and blue ebonite. It was really, really good. We sold out in a couple of weeks. Immediately regretted only making 50, but they were gone. And then we wanted to do another limited edition, so then we did the Cherry Cordial, so which is a black and a red ebonite with gold trim. So that one we did after that. That one was hanging around for a little while. I think we had it for a solid year or a year and a half. Okay, and then, sorry, I want to show you all the rest of these. After that, we had the Pearlized Purple, and this was, we had a lot of people that were asking for a purple, and we actually sampled up 3 different types of purples and then allowed everybody to take a vote and put a vote out on the blog and everything, and this was the one that won, so that was the pen that we made, and it was around for a while. We recently discontinued it, but it was around for a good 5 years or so. After that, we did a limited edition one that was called Macassar Ebonite, and the thing that I liked about this one was that it reminded me of Macassar Ebony. That's kind of why we did the name that way, because that was a wood that I worked with back when I was making pens by hand. So that was kind of cool to do it that way. And then we started doing the seasonal Premier colors. And that's when things really started to take off, because we had so many amazing colors and choices to choose from, but we knew we just weren't going to be able to do regular standing editions often enough. And because, you know, Edison is a smaller manufacturer and they can get smaller quantities of material and turn the pens over quicker, we knew we could do a lot of really cool colors. So we started out with the first one, which is Black Ice. This is one that Brian had chosen and did a good job with that one. And then Rachel really started to take over with Cherry Blossom, which is now a regular edition color. It was out, it was a seasonal color that started, and we left it out for about 2 years, and then we just brought it back as a regular color. Same thing goes for Caribbean Sea. This is now a regular color as well, but that was the following season in the summer of 2014. Gosh, I can't even remember my years now. Next in the fall, we had Autumn Harvest, which this is one of my personal favorites. I just love this material. It looks really fantastic. So that one was really cool. After that, so we kind of went to the, we thought like we were doing a lot of swirls, maybe we'll start doing some flecks. We then did Majestic Pine, which is this nice green flecked color. Green pens are tough. Sometimes they're hit or miss, and we didn't know how that one was going to do. The challenge that we had with Majestic Pine is with this flecked material, we were getting a problem with getting chipping that was coming, because when you have this flecked material, it's literally like broken up pieces of resin that get cast into more resin. So sometimes, because of the process that's used to make it, you can get some weak bonds that happen in between the chunks here and the resin that's cast afterwards to make it a solid brick. So in the thinner parts, like especially where the cap band goes down like that, this is specific to the Premier, we were finding that we had caps that were cracking a little bit there. We replaced everybody that had caps that cracked, and we still will if you had any issues, but after that we said, you know, on the Premier, just because of that, we could either thicken up the center, not the center band, but the bottom of the cap there, which we thought made it look kind of weird, or we could kind of stick more with swirls and solid colors and not go so much with the flecked. So that Majestic Pine was really kind of the end of the fleck, and you see there's no more flecks now. Then we went on to Lilac, so we hadn't done a purple in a little while. We went with a lighter purple. That was really nice. Then we had Fireball, which was a summer color that we did, nice red. I wanted to name it Fireball because I always associated it with like having those like cinnamon like hot candies that you have at like the pool. That was like one of my pool candies as a kid, so that's why Fireball came up there. The next one we had was Midnight Thunder. So we had done a lot of like swirls and deep pearlescence and stuff like that. So we decided we wanted to do more of a solid color, but we still wanted an interesting pattern to it, because that's part of the cool thing about these premieres is you can get a little brave with doing like crazy colors and stuff. So we have fun with it. And if it's a total flop, it's only around for 3 months and then it's gone. So Midnight Thunder was really fun. You know, had kind of like a red, white, and blue type of pattern. Even though it was for a fall color, we were like, oh, we should have done that in the summer with 4th of July or whatever, but nah, it still worked. So it was kind of cool. It's kind of reminded us like a lightning storm kind of thing. Then we had Mystical Myrrh, which was for winter. So a nice like silver, gold, brown. It was really kind of an interesting pattern on this one. We had no idea how this was going to do, but it was fairly popular. And then we got to Water Lily, which is unofficially known throughout the pen community as Unicorn Barf, which we'd known about for a while. And this one really like put the stamp on it for Rachel, like definitively getting to pick the color. Like Rachel always has final say with whatever colors we pick, because she just got the knack for it. So this is a pen that we had seen, like, I mean, literally they have like hundreds of different materials, and we had gone to, you know, the DC Pen Show one year and seen a lot of their different colors, and we're kind of looking and talking about what colors we should do for the future. Rachel picked this one out and was like, this is going to do phenomenal. And Brian was like, I don't know about that, Rachel. And she was like, trust me. So I think Brian made a couple of his like custom pens out of this material, and they were like the first ones to sell at the show. And Rachel was like, yeah, see? And so we decided to make a premiere out of this one, and it was just unbelievably popular, as you probably can imagine. So Unicorn Barf Water Lily stands as one of the most popular premieres that we have ever done. Next, we came out with Neptune's Pearl, which, you know, I have an obsession with blue, so I was like, oh, what's better than a blue pen? How about a pen with multiple blues in it? So we went with that. It was kind of a cool swirl color, and had the lighter blue is a little bit translucent too, so I thought that was kind of neat. So we went with that. And this is to the point where we started getting into like, you know, hey, maybe we should involve our team in having some input into these names. So we started to ask our team around for our team, because, you know, previously we were kind of like naming the pens, you know, just me and Rachel are coming up with whatever names. But now we have a nice creative team here, and we're like, well, let's start having our team involved in some of these names, and we're starting to get into the kind of that era. So after Neptune's Pearl came, oh gosh. Oh, I'm blanking. Oh, I'm so ashamed of myself here. Oh man, I should have written them down. I thought I should have written it down. Oh gosh, this is embarrassing. I don't remember. I don't remember. How do you like that? Totally blanking. I'll get it. No, it's not coming to me. I'm totally blanking on this pen. It'll come back to me before we're done. But anyway, has a nice kind of like fire laser theme going on through here. Fire laser theme? I am quickly degrading. Next, we had Arctic Currents. We wanted to do an ebonite again, but we didn't want to make it a limited edition. It ended up being kind of a limited edition, because what happened is he was limited on the material, and then Edison ended up moving their shop at the time that we were in the quarter of the season that we were making this pen. So they just flat out ran out of time and ability to produce more. So that was it. We ended up having to be more limited in the Arctic Currents. And then we had Sea Glass, which is the one that we just finished up. We ran out of these way ahead of time too, just because of just time, honestly. The Edison, they had some time constraints of their own, and we were only able to produce so many of them. But it was a really cool color, and this one was one that we were like, oh, I don't really know. It's really interesting, and that was really kind of cool there. And then that leads us to, I can't believe I can't remember the name of this one. Oh my gosh, you guys are just gonna like, I feel so unlegitimate now that I can't remember the name of the pen that I helped come up with, but I have a notoriously terrible memory when it comes to words, if that helps at all. Oh gosh, Arctic something, no. Mystic something, nope. Arctical Mystics, nope. Anyway, this is the summer premiere for 2017. It is called Delphinium, and it is a blue and purple. The blue and purple, well, they're both translucent. The blue is slightly more translucent and has this white ribbon in between the blue and the purple. This is, I think, one of my favorite colors of any of the premieres that we have done. And what's cool about this, we did the thing with our team where we kind of, voted on the name. So what we do is we put a box out and we put the pen out and we have everybody kind of drop a name in for whatever they think it should be. Rachel and I kind of sift through them and pick out, a selection, maybe 3 or 5, something like that. And then we have everybody on the team vote for it, and that's what we go with. And Delphinium was really cool. Rachel and I didn't even come up with the name, but it was cool because Delphinium is a naturally blue flower that was actually what Rachel had in her bouquet when we got married. So it was kind of a significant color to us without even really thinking about it, or a significant name to us without even really intending to be that way. And it's very fitting for the pen too. So this is our color, Delphinium. We are launching it starting today as of the launch of this video. I can say we're going to sell out because we didn't get quite as many as we were hoping to have at the initial launch. So we'll probably sell out and then get more stock in, but I'm hoping we can keep a pretty decent stock of these. I know Edison's working really hard on trying to keep good stock of these, but we have historically not been able to make it the entire season with a good number of these premieres because it's always really tough to estimate exactly how many to do. And it's not the only thing that Edison has got going on, so it's historically a bit of a challenge to do. I can't believe, I know I keep talking about it, but my gosh, it's going to drive me crazy that I can't remember the name of this pen. See, now that I have 20 of them, I'm like, we really should have engraved the names of the pen on the pen because it's getting difficult to remember them all. Anywho, nice little trip down memory lane there. So you can check out all of them. There have been some that have been, they're all $149. Some of them have been a little bit more, especially the ebonites, depending on the material and stuff like that. But there will hopefully be many more to come. We don't plan on stopping doing the seasonal thing anytime soon. So that is my little collection of all of the Edison pens that we have there. All right, this is a long Q&A. I'm only the second question in, I'm just realizing. I'm going to look to speed this up here just a little bit for you, okay? This next question is from James in an email. What does the feeder tube do, and why might it play a role in controlling ink flow? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pen to use as demonstration. The feeder, what it does is it helps you to assist in your ink flow. So I'm going to use an example here with this Edison Nouveau Premier Delphinium. So the feeder tube that I hope that you're talking about, that I'm going to assume you're talking about, is this little tiny tube all the way on the back of your pen. A lot of pens have it. It's not unusual to see this on a bunch of different pens. And you're like, why does this little thing need to stick up here? Well, I mean, this is the grip of the pen, which is really kind of ancillary. It's not really, doesn't really have anything to do with the flow. It's just where you hold it. But what happens when you put your converter on the back of this pen is this seats right on here, like that. That's where it's grabbing onto. So that feeder tube really is to help seat the converter right onto it. But even pens that don't have a cartridge converter might have that tube on there. And essentially, really, it's to help assist in flow. And it gives us something to grab onto. But also, if you think about the opening of this converter, if you guys have ever filled up a converter with ink, the fact that the opening is smaller and the cavity in here is bigger, the ink does not come out of the pen because there's no opening at the top. It's sort of like when you hold a straw, with the top of your finger. It doesn't naturally, the gravity just can kind of make it fall out. It'll kind of fall down to the bottom, but then it won't drip out of the pen. So when it's sitting on the back of the feed like that, it allows the ink that's inside the chamber here to actually touch on to the back of that feed, and it allows it to kind of assist in coming down through the mechanism there. So that is really what it's for, is to assist in flow. And then for a cartridge converter pen, it allows it to seat the converter onto the pen. Cool? All right, next question is from Perogata on Instagram. The way we talk about nib feedback is rather one-dimensional. There seem to be other qualities to feedback than the magnitude. How can we better classify feedback and describe the difference between, for example, a Platinum 3776 and an ill-tuned IPG nib pen? Maybe we can borrow inspiration from the photography community, where they have invented all kinds of terms to explain good versus bad bokeh types. So there's some terms that I commonly associate with feedback, which admittedly is a very general term anyway. I think like smooth or buttery or glassy. It's basically like when a nib is really highly polished and it just kind of, there's no resistance on the page. It just kind of glides around. All of those are interchangeable terms that I've heard used to describe that. Toothy is what I typically associate with something like a Platinum 3776 nib. It's not scratchy, it's not like cutting into the paper, but it does feel like it has a little bit more drag. You know, drag is another term that kind of fits in here. But toothiness is something that describes kind of that general feeling. And then other nibs that have that kind of natural toothiness, most of the Keras Customs titanium nibs, the Stipula titanium nib has that too. The Aurora Ypsilon, very toothy nib as well. It doesn't cut the paper. It's not an inconsistent scratchiness. Like that is one difference that happens when you have toothiness or just a pen with a lot of drag to it. It feels the same in all directions. Because what happens is sometimes when you get a scratchy nib, it's because if you have your nib tines, you know, say you're looking directly at the pen, right? You have your two tines on the nib, and if you look straight at it like this, there's a ball on the end of the nib, and it's if one of the tines is too low, it can cause that to catch and feel scratchy. But you're only going to feel that in one direction. Usually it's in the opposite direction of the tine that's dropped down. So if you have a nib that's too low on the left side, as you move to the right, it's going to drag and it's going to feel scratchy. But then when you move it the other direction, it's going to feel fine. So that can be a kind of a sign as you're writing of a pen that is maybe, you know, needs some repair type work as opposed to is just naturally kind of has a lot of drag to it, is how consistent it is that feeling. And then scratchy, I think, is the, you know, other term where it cuts paper is another thing. That's where something really feels wrong. Like, and you'll know if you use a few different pens, the difference between toothy and scratchy, and you get there pretty quickly. It is difficult in terms of the terminology. What's different than something like photography with bokeh is this is something that you are trying to describe how it feels, but with words. And that translation is very difficult. It's not like something where you can show an image, like with bokeh, and you can point very specifically to things and say, this is the example of what I'm talking about. You know, this is the what is it, chromatic aberration that I'm seeing right here. Nice little terminology there for you, for your photography folks. You know, it's not quite the same as that. I can say, oh yeah, this is what I'm feeling at this point, and unless you've felt it before, you have no idea what I'm talking about. So naturally, it's a little more difficult to talk about tactile things like that. And what I think is typically done is you do some kind of scale rating, which I guess kind of fits back to your magnitude, like you were talking about in your question. So that's something that we could get a little more granular, like in terms of, you know, nib smoothness. Like a 1 might be it's cutting paper and writes terribly, and a 10 is I'm like slipping off the page because my nib is so smooth. And you could probably have some kind of medium in there. I know that the X out of 10 ranking is common when you're talking about ink flow. A lot of Nibmeisters and stuff like that will use flow ratings out of 10 that we use to describe it. But I don't know like what nuanced terminology to really get in terms of feedback. Could be interesting. So that's kind of my bright idea, is to go the out of 10 ranking. But that would be something interesting to explore. I kind of wanted to take this question just to explain and explore that a little bit, but I also want to get some of your feedback. If there's something out there that you all have used or heard other people use as common terminology that maybe I just haven't been aware of, so I could really use some feedback, or maybe we should just come up with some kind of terminology and just make it up and kind of say, this is what we're going to use to describe it. I think that could be really helpful. You know, personally, I've thought about like, you know, that is one of the things where I don't have a really great way to describe or display that for the pens that I sell on Goulet pens is, you know, exactly how smooth do these nibs feel. I have to use general terms or maybe shoot a video and describe it, but having some more specific terminology that could be more understandable and even put into like a faceted search type function on the website would be amazing. I just haven't figured out how to make that happen yet. So that's kind of, I'm going to rattle that around in my head a little bit. But anyway, if you have any bright ideas, please let me know in the comments. This next question is from kuyaxdr on Instagram. What are some tips for using fountain pens on cheap, everyday paper? Okay. This is a really popular question, I think, especially in the US because we have notoriously terrible paper here. We have a lot of inkjet printers and just, not a lot of people are using fountain pens, so we have very absorbent paper that just tends to be generally pretty terrible when it comes to fountain pen ink. Cheap paper is generally more absorbent. That's usually what people are referring to, or maybe it doesn't feel as smooth and it kind of grabs more and stuff like that. It's often going to feather and bleed more because it's just not as treated, and there's it's a more expensive process to put coatings and stuff on paper, and so just not as much of that is done here in the US. So because of the absorbency, it's always going to spread a little bit more. That's one thing to keep in mind. When you have really absorbent paper, whatever nib size that you have, it's probably going to seem broader on this cheap paper than it will on like really good fountain pen friendly paper. Your color is going to be less saturated. It's going to be just more washed out and muted. You're not going to get the same vibrancy, the same shading, the same characteristics if you're using any type of shimmering or sheening ink. If it's absorbing into the paper, it just kills all of that. So you're not going to get some of that amazing stuff that you see on Instagram and whatnot with these sheening and shimmering inks. So that's something to keep in mind. I would say go with as fine of a nib as you can stand, usually like an extra fine or a fine. Again, you're going to have a trade-off because if you're using a really cheap paper, it's not going to be super smooth. So usually when you're going towards finer nibs, you're sacrificing a little bit on the smoothness anyway over a medium or a broad or something like that. So you're already going to be going to a finer nib because you're going to try to put less ink down on the page. If you have an extra fine nib on really terrible paper, it's going to write like a medium nib on really good paper. Generally speaking, of course, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but that's not a wild association that I'm making here. So, if you're going with an extra fine nib and you have a really crappy toothy paper, you're going to feel a significant amount of drag, which that is also going to be part of the experience, because fountain pens, when you're writing with them, you get the tactile experience of actually writing with the pen, which is part of the enjoyment. Another part is how does it actually look on the page. So you're going to have to find kind of that sweet spot for you. I tend to say fine nibs really thread that needle most of the time. Certain nibs that are really wet, extra fine might be just fine for you. But and generally Japanese nibs will be ground a little finer, so just kind of keeping that in mind. You want to go with pens that don't gush ink, because again, the whole nib size thing, the reason that's an issue is because broader nibs, well, they put down a broader line, put down more ink, so it's going to absorb more into the paper, it's going to bleed through, it's going to be less ideal for you. So going with finer nibs, going with pens that are not quite as wet. So if you know that there are certain brands that are talked about that are just gushers, or fire hoses or whatever, you'll want to maybe stay away from those. Most European brands tend to be a little bit broader in their nibs, especially on extra fines and fines. So keeping that in mind. If you're trying to use any like stub nib or flex nib, especially flex nibs, in order to keep up the ink flow when you flex the nibs out, puts down a lot of ink. So that is going to be really bad if you're using it on cheap absorbent paper, because it's just going to dump in there and it's going to spread and feather like crazy. To the point where you can actually go, I've used some notebooks and stuff like that where I've used a flex nib, and I'm not joking, it's gone through 5 to 6 different sheets of paper before it's finally stopped. I mean, it'll bleed through that bad on the wrong type of paper. When it again, with this whole thing of like ink flow and all that kind of stuff, the type of nib that you choose can matter. Not just the nib size, but the material of nib can make a difference too. I tend to lean a little more towards steel nibs, generally speaking. And that's really just because steel is a little bit harder material. And if you are using a softer material like a gold or a titanium, if you're writing with the same amount of pressure that you are on a steel, meaning any significant additional pressure, you're gonna flex those tines a little bit, and it's gonna put more ink down. So again, getting back to the whole amount of ink kind of thing. Especially if you're newer to fountain pens, you're used to having to really bear down on your ballpoints and your roller balls to get them to write. Now, fountain pens, a properly tuned fountain pen should only write by using the weight of the pen itself. Like you literally should be able to take your fountain pen and just touch it to the page like this and have it write. So that's what you want to do when you are you know, that's what you're going to want to take into account when you're doing that. I completely lost my train of thought. What the heck was I just talking about? I saw the rainbow pen. I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And I just completely lost my train of thought. Let's see here. Yes, not a lot of pressure. Okay. Because the more pressure you write, the more ink it's going to put down. If you have a softer nib, that's going to put even more down. So, I mean, you totally can use titanium and gold nibs. I would just say that you want to be conscious of that and lighten up your pressure if you find that it's putting down too much. And then some ink is going to perform better than others on cheap paper too. It's not just about the pen. The ink is a big factor too. As far as which inks, that gets really debatable because the challenge that it happens when you're talking about something like a Rhodia, Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, you know, fairly popular and commonly used papers in the fountain pen world. There's kind of a standard. They're made very consistently, so you get that. When you're dealing with less expensive papers, the paper itself might not even be consistent. If you're buying a ream of inkjet paper, it might not perform consistently with fountain pens from the start of the ream to the end of the ream. You know, or if you have a notebook, it might have paper from different parts of the world that are put into the same notebook from some larger companies and stuff like that. So when you start talking about how it performs on certain papers, it gets really random in terms of the consistency. So, you know, check as many ink reviews as you can. There's definitely some that kind of float to the top as, generally speaking, this performs well on cheap paper. But again, cheap paper means so many different things to so many different people. You got to always take that with a grain of salt. So it's always best, you know, to read up reviews, study it up, of course, but then get a sample of it yourself. That's why we sell samples, so you can get it in your pen and try it on the paper that you are having to use. And then that's the best way to really see how it's going to do. And then just the other thing to keep in mind is that you need to be prepared to only use pretty much one side of the page because of the bleed through or the feathering that you might see. Really the bleed through doesn't really have anything to do with feathering, but the bleed through on the back. If you're bleeding through and it's actually coming out on the other side, it's going to be really difficult to write on the other side and have it be readable at all. And then it's going to bleed back through onto the other side of the page. That is one reason that actually can be pretty good justification when you start really like falling in love and getting into fountain pens. To justify getting nicer paper for yourself is the fact that you can actually use both sides of a page as opposed to only using one side. So that's something to keep in mind as you basically get to double the use of your paper. It's something to consider. So those are all nice little tips that you can try for using fountain pens on cheap paper. Hopefully some of that can help you out. All right, a couple questions left here and then we'll wrap up. This one is a troubleshooting question from Lesley S on our blog. How do you know when you're running out of ink? One of my worst fears is running out of ink when I'm in the middle of a meeting or somewhere else when I'm taking notes. What are signs that the ink is low, especially when you can't see how full your pen is? Okay, so it's a very good question. I think if you're using fountain pens with any kind of regularity, this is a very common thing to have to deal with because, you know, unlike a ballpoint or roller ball, fountain pens need to be filled up, you know, fairly often, you know, especially if you're using them a lot, especially if you're using them on cheap paper, like I just discussed in the last question. You end up having to deal with a lot of fills, whereas you might have to fill it every few days or maybe once a week, as opposed to who the heck knows, especially if you're using disposable, you know, ballpoints or roller balls. I can guarantee you never get a thought how long one particular pen lasts you because you don't carry just one pen with you and use it, you know, it's just whatever is around. But once you start actually carrying and you invest in a really nice pen and you start carrying it around and using just that pen, you notice like, oh gosh, I really go through ink. Part of it is because you are actually going through ink a little bit more, but part of it too is you're actually using just one pen and not, you know, just grabbing whatever pen is closest to you and using a little bit here, a little bit there, and so on. So that's part of it. It depends on the pen, for sure. If it's truly running out, you know, if your ink is truly running dry, then it's going to show signs of starting to run dry. So your line is going to get weaker, the color is going to get weaker, it's going to start to narrow in terms of its line width. You might start to see a break in the flow, so it might start to break on you on a couple letters, or it might have a harder time starting. The one thing that I've seen, you know, more than a few people do when they get first into fountain pens, if they are given it as a gift or they don't really kind of know what they're getting into, they will not really think about having to clean or refill the pen. And they'll use the pen, you know, for whatever period of time. they're not really thinking about the fact they're using one pen consistently now instead of, you know, just whenever, or the pen will dry, or they don't use it that often and the pen will dry out a little bit. And so they think, okay, so I need to just like scribble on it more or tap it or press on it more or whatever. And they end up bending their nib and kind of ruining it, just trying to get more ink out of the pen, when really, if they just open up the pen, they could see it needs more ink. You know, that's a very common thing. So yeah, hopefully you're not in that situation. Just the fact that you're even asking me this question, I'm assuming you're further along in your ink pen journey than that. But that is something to be thinking about, is how often do you need to be filling. I don't think it's a bad idea, especially if you're in a work situation, to keep whatever ink that you are regularly using at your desk. And I know technically if you want to consider, okay, UV exposure and stuff like that, you don't want to keep a bottle out. Yes, in the most purest of forms, that is true. However, if you're really using this for notes, you probably are more concerned about what you're actually writing down than you are about a couple of dollars worth of ink on your desk and maintaining its integrity a year from now with UV exposure. Like, I would just worry about whatever, like I'm a very visual person personally, so I have ink stored all over the place because a lot of my ink I want to keep kind of for posterity, so I'll keep it aside. But whatever ink that I'm kind of actively using, like right now I have a bottle of, you know, Robert Oster Blue Water Ice, and I can say I've torn through like a fifth of the bottle in the last couple of days, because every pen that I'm testing and every pen that I'm kind of trying out, this is the bottle that I have right here visibly on my desk. So it's very natural to me, and I'm looking at the ink level and I'm like, oh, it's getting low, and it's right there and it's top of mind and it's very convenient. So try to keep a bottle of ink out, and that will remind you, oh yeah, I should fill my pen. Or if you're on hold with somebody and you're like, oh, you know what, let me fill my pen real quick. Boom. If it's the same color, you don't have to clean it out. You don't have to do anything like that. You know, you want to clean out maybe once a month or so, but if it's just, you know, you want to top it off, it can be very easy to do that in 15 to 20 seconds as you're on hold, or, you know, oh, so-and-so, you want to go out to lunch together? Oh, okay, you just got to go grab your purse. Okay, cool. Let me just fill my pen real quick while you grab your purse. And then literally that's it. So as long as you can like think of it, and keeping the bottle out can help you, think of it top of mind. Let's see here. What else? The specific pen. So it's going to matter. It's going to vary depending on the pen. Is what it is. Cartridge converter pens are pretty easy. You know, for example, got the Edison pens here. Any cartridge converter pen that you have I can't think of a single one that doesn't have, well, okay, there are some converters like the Pilot, you know, Con 20, which is not even really a thing anymore. But there's some converters out there that are not clear, but most converters you have are going to be clear. Most of them. Now, with the exception like the Pilot Metropolitan, so that one's fair. That one comes with a non-clear converter. So that would be one actually pretty popular pen that is an example of something that isn't easy to tell when it is running low on ink. But generally speaking, most cartridge converters, it's going to be clear. And you can literally just kind of like open up the pen, take a peek, see, oh, it's getting low, and then you can fill it. If you have something like a Metropolitan where you can't see inside of it, there's a couple of tricks that you can do. There's a couple of situations, you know, like this is one mechanism, you know, it's like a kind of an aerometric, you know, thing. It's basically got a little bladder here and you squeeze it, and that's how you fill it. Now it can take, you know, a regular, you know, piston type converter that is clear. The Con 50 previously, now the Con 40 is kind of replacing it, so that would be it. The Con 40 is clear. So that fits on a Metropolitan. You can replace that if you happen to have this particular pen. But if you're in a situation where you have some type of converter or some other type of mechanism where you can't see in any way inside, the one trick that I have that I use, which there is an element of risk involved in doing this, if I don't want to actually just go and ink it back up, say I don't remember what color I have in here, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't remember what color it is, I know I'm going to need to clean it out, but I don't want to do that until I know if it's all used up or not. You can grab a paper towel and you can kind of put it around the nib like this, just to kind of protect it from splattering places, and then you can just squeeze the converter a little bit. This pen is empty right now, but if I had some ink in here, I could squeeze it gently, and if I would say it was half full, by the time that I squeeze it, oh no, look, there is ink in here. How do you go? How do you like that? Okay, do you see that there? So I've got a little bit of ink there, and you know, there might be some air bubbles, but oh, see, I'm trying to demonstrate for you, and I just dripped ink all over my desk. So you got to be careful. This is why you keep the paper towel around it, but you can't really see what's going on while you're doing that. You can literally just kind of look and then squeeze like that, and you can see as you squeeze like, oh, okay, I've squeezed it almost all the way down, and before the ink starts to come out a little bit, I know that I'm almost empty. So be like, okay, I can probably make it through one more meeting, but then I've really got to be careful. So that's one thing that you can keep in mind there, is you can try doing that, but then of course you might get ink on your fingers, or you might spill it on your desk. So let me be an example for you of when you live life on the edge as a pen person. It's the same kind of situation when you get into other pens. Like this is a crescent filler, or sorry, I believe they call it an arc filler. But a crescent concept here is it's got a bar in here with a bladder, kind of like the Metropolitan has, but it's a bladder inside. Same kind of boat where you have to kind of squeeze this down. This is the Millennium Arc that we had a little while ago from Visconti. If you have a lever filling pen, this is a Waterman. And if you have a lever filling pen, it's the same kind of boat. There's a piston, or there's a bladder inside here, and it's got a lever that you pull up that's got a bar. It presses a bar down and kind of compresses that. Same kind of situation. If you've got ink partially in here, you just kind of lift that lever a little bit, and ink would start to come out of here if it had ink in it. And then you could kind of gauge about how much you have left. If you have a piston pen, same kind of concept. This is a Mont Blanc Leo Tolstoy. A lot of piston pens have ink windows for exactly this purpose, so you can see what's going on, but this pen doesn't. So it would be the same kind of thing. I would just kind of untwist until I see that the fins on the feed would start to fill up with ink, and I would know, oh, okay, I've got about 3/4 of a thing left in here. I'm okay. You're gonna have to judge it a little bit based on your pen, because you'll know about how far the travel is on the piston mechanism, or how much you need to squeeze on the lever or whatever it is. And then that's something that you'll learn as you go, once you get to know your pens a little bit better. With all this stuff, you can keep in mind this is all fairly complicated, right? Like you're getting pretty nuanced here in terms of managing your pens. The simplest solution with all of this, aside from just refilling your pen on a regular basis, which may be a lot to ask depending on who you are, the simplest solution that I find is just to carry an extra pen. And you might get to the point where I am, where I have like 20 pens on me, because I never want to have, I carry for a lot of other reasons, but I carry a bunch of pens inked up at any one time. And if I'm going somewhere, actually it's to the point now when most of the time when I'm travel, unless I know I'm going to be specifically writing a ton, when I travel, I usually bring like a Visconti traveling ink pot or something like that. But I don't bring whole bottles of ink with me when I travel, because I'll usually bring like 10 pens. And I know that I have ink in all the pens, and I'm like, okay, well, this is going to be these are all my backup pens here. So anyway, it depends on who you are, but the backup pen thing could really help you out. All right, and last question for this week. This is a business question from Sarahabetz on Instagram. Is it a job requirement for Goulet employees to like fountain pens, or can they prefer a ballpoint? Well, first off, we call everybody team members here, so I wanted to keep the integrity of your question, but Goulet team members, is it a requirement for them to like it? No, it is not. I think it's something that naturally happens just by being around them all the time, and being around a bunch of other people who love them and are talking about them all the time, and customers who are excited about them all the time. Naturally, it's easy to get very passionate about pens just by working here. But it's not everybody. It's not for everybody. We think we have a way higher ratio of people that are into fountain pens than you do in most work environments, just because that's the business that we're in. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of our team uses them on a regular basis. Everybody, when they start here, we get them a pen. They get a pen when they hit 90 days, because that's kind of a milestone, and a nicer pen. And a bunch of folks will, when there's a new pen release that comes out, usually it generates quite a bit of excitement whenever there's a Lamy release or anything like that. Usually gets quite a few internal interested parties when they come out, but it's not a requirement. It's not something that we like screen out for, that we're looking for, like, oh, you don't have pen knowledge or experience, so I'm sorry, I don't think you're going to be a good fit here. No, it's the kind of thing, like, because of our history and what we have here, I didn't know anything about pens when we first got into this business, about fountain pens anyway, and I learned, and we have tons of videos and tons of resources, and honestly, it can actually be an advantage to not know anything about fountain pens and then come into this environment and like be shown this whole world, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because you have that same experience that a lot of you all do when you first discover fountain pens, and it's like, oh my gosh, my eyes have been opened. Having that empathy and that experience as a member of our team connects us closer with you guys. So, you know, it's something that it's cool when it can happen, and having that passion and experience for it. It's also okay if some people just don't write that much, and it's just not a big part of their life, but they still will kind of get excited about how excited everybody else gets and being a part of it and all that kind of stuff. So at some level, yeah, everybody's passionate about what's going on around here. So I think we could pretty safely say that. All right, that's it for this week. So went a little long, especially at the beginning, but I appreciate you sticking with me. My question of the week this week is going to be really not anything that came out of the questions, but it's going to be talking about ink. So it's obviously getting to be summertime. You know, summertime, everybody kind of flips into a different mode usually. So I'm curious, do you have a favorite summertime ink? You know, different change of seasons. Maybe you're going to be traveling. Maybe it's a time, you know, ink sample palooza is going on. Maybe you're trying a bunch of new stuff. I'm curious to know, do you have like a go-to summertime ink, or what are you curious about trying this summer? Just talk about ink. Talk about yourselves in the comments this week. It would be really cool to hear. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate that. You can check out more of what I talked about here on gouletpens.com. If you have any questions for future weeks or comments you want to leave, just go ahead and do so in the comments on the blog or on YouTube. I would appreciate it very much. Subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate it. Be sure to check out. We're going to have lots of cool stuff going on this summer. Appreciate you watching. Thanks so much, and right on.